post your notes tonight?
Yeah, I need to.
Just because I missed the last lecture. I think you went through probably 14 and 15.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's all the environmental problem stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
How's your weekend? So far, so good. My daughter came on Friday, so we actually got to hang out, catch up.
Nice. That's awesome.
Did you see that paper straws seem to be causing more damage than plastic straws?
Ha! You
Yeah.
totally reminded me of what I was gonna look up because I was like, what the fuck? That was.
I didn't read that deep into it yet, but I find that super funny.
Paper straws also have gluten in them and the glue that holds them together, so I can't have them. Which is a fun fact.
What do they have?
The glue that like holds it together
Yeah?
is like a wheat paste.
No way.
So if you're allergic to gluten, you can't use paper straws.
I didn't know that.
Especially the ones from Starbucks. Oh my God. Make me so sick. Oh.
Wow, my mind, yeah, I'm pretty good on knowing like what has gluten, but that surprised me.
Yeah, it surprised me too. I'm like, why am I getting sick every time I take that with me? That makes me sick.
Yeah, I can just go in one pile. All right, I think we'll get started. So if you're joining us remotely, I see somebody already in the chat, so just say hi so I know you're here. So we look a little sparse in class today, so I assume most of y'all are online or catching it later. And any questions before we begin? So quick reminders, of course, so today's our last lecture. So we're doing chapter 11 today, and then of course on Thursday, we will have our exam 3, and so we mentioned it will not be cumulative. I'm not going to update the study guide, so just sticking to the big picture ideas in the study guide that are there. So again, I'm trying to just pick questions and make questions that are broad, so like we've been doing. And again, it will be curved, so try not to stress. So exam 3, and again, over chapters 11 through 15. And I will post the notes after class today. And if I don't post the notes, you can all email me and yell at me, and then I will definitely post the notes.
Sometimes some of the chapters will pop up, and then some of them I can't open them no matter if like I'm using like Firefox or using different forms of alternative formats to try to pull it up. I experienced that last term with chapter 9 specifically.
That's weird.
I couldn't open any of the notes for whatever reason.
So some of the notes are really messed up on there. You can't open it unless, like, if you don't have the PDF version up, it just closes. You'll open it and it'll close.
The OneNote package?
Yeah, the one that that file is not liked by Blackboard or something.
Yeah.
What if you download the OneNote package?
It closes out on OneNote. It opens OneNote and it says it crashes.
And there's like a PDF thing where you can pay to make it work, somehow translate it into a different format. But I don't want to pay to open the notes. So
Yeah, well, I post the notes twice, so they're in the OneNote package and the PDF, so they should be the same.
Yeah.
So,
For some reason, specifically for chapter 9, last test, I couldn't open either one of them.
when that happens, you might have to just email me and I'll have to poke around with the file.
Yeah. Some things I had to open up through Firefox because it's more compatible with some of those.
Yeah. I haven't heard that about the OneNote package, because usually people The issue with the OneNote package is you can't use a OneNote app. It has to be the full desktop version. And so I hadn't had issues anymore with that, so I'm not sure what's going on. But they did update Blackboard this summer.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
There's a specific app called OneNote we have to.
Yeah, but there's two versions of OneNote, because there's OneNote, like the app version that might already be installed, and that doesn't work. It's like not, it won't read a one package file.
Yeah, I downloaded the desktop.
Yeah.
It still just doesn't like it.
Okay, maybe I might want to look at your computer after class, but and figure out what's going on, because I might have to contact Blackboard.
Yeah, and I kept being told that with this new upgrade, it's not compatible with my Chromebook. I'm like, that's the only computer I have this summer.
That
So-
shouldn't be the case either, because Blackboard was designed for Chrome.
Yeah.
I know, and I keep talking to, I even called the IT people, and they're like, that must be the issue. I'm like,
All of RCC's websites are optimized for Chrome. That's why the websites are faster than like
I
Firefox
thought
and
it
stuff.
would be easy, but it's a struggle.
Blackboard sucks. They should get rid of it. It's just like they should get rid of Ambassador Bookstore. Ambassador Bookstore is the worst.
Well, yeah, especially when you go to the library.
Yeah. We should take formal ambassador comments after class, because I wouldn't mind presenting that to faculty senate.
So
But
I've been complaining about it to every like department chair that I've encountered.
yeah,
for,
keep
like, 2.5 years
complaining.
now.
Keep complaining.
And I will continue even when I'm at SOU.
Good, because we were stuck in a contract, but then yada, yada, yada. But
No, but I'm gonna still work here. I'll still be a student worker, so I'll still complain.
good.
Because we get lots of complaints in the Veteran Center for Ambassador not working. Or they say that you need the wrong book. That happens a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, we should talk after class about that, because I do want to get that concerns. But overall, it's been a fun pleasure teaching this class. Of course, like I mentioned, this was my first time teaching oceanography formally, so it was a lot of fun doing the labs and learning with you guys. So I hope you guys had fun too. I'm sorry that we didn't get to do our field trips, and I'm kind of bummed still about that.
I mean, I'm bummed, but I also saved like $400. I mean, I'm not completely heartbroken about it, but it would have been nice.
Yeah. And then on that note, I think I have updated all your extra credits, so double check that with online with Blackboard, so it should be updated. And so on that note, so we're giving 5 points for either if you made it to the coast earlier, so for any trip or anything else, or I'll just put outdoor adventure. And I've been getting lots of great pictures of Crater Lakes, the fisheries, so I really loved all that. So I'm glad you guys got to at least explore somewhat. And then also 10 points for trash. And do you guys happen to know when grades are due?
Usually the Monday of the following week, because they post them on Tuesday.
Okay, so that would be like Monday, September, what, 2nd or something? And so
The first Friday.
yeah, because I
So
think,
my VA pay shows up.
I think it's usually, yeah, like that Monday right after.
I think it said the second, I have a hazy memory of thinking of it, 'cause I gotta send my official transcripts once it's in, but, that's not out of any rush thing, that was just looking to see when I do that, and I figured I remember next week, midweek.
And so that means, yeah, I don't know that they're due 1 week, but I'll accept it up to Sunday night. So that means, so this Sunday, I think, what, September 1st? So if you want to pick up your trash still, so a lot of you have sent me trash.
First Sunday would be September 3rd.
Okay, oops.
I didn't get my extra credit.
For the trash? Or,
For the trip.
okay, I thought I'd put yours, but send me just another email and I'll double check. Because it should be in the extra credit column. Did you check in a separate extra credit?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought I put yours in. But, all right, so again, you have until Sunday night to get your 10 extra points for the trash if you haven't done so already. All right, so let's talk about our last chapter of pollution. And again, this is one of those topics we've kind of been touching about, especially with all the streams and the river runoffs, and we kind of mentioned that with the algal blooms and how the pollution affects it. We've mentioned it even locally with the nitrates and the phosphates and how we see that even causing algal blooms in our local streams. And of course, we'll also look at some oil spills or petroleum pollution. And then you guys have good chatter this morning also about other plastics pollutions, talking about straws. So how we try to address these issues and maybe create more problems. And then a little bit about the laws. So pollution is just broadly defined as any harmful substance or energy put into the ocean by humans. And we've talked about anything from trash. We also mentioned that noise pollution, so that can be a source of pollution, such as from the wind farms we had mentioned. And so they just have this kind of standard. They're just saying that, you know, if a pollutant caused a 50% mortality rate among this test, and the book wasn't too clear how they did this test. I was kind of curious if they did just like a local test or if they try to do like a LD50 comparison in the lab, so looking at like what the toxicity levels would be at certain chemicals. So that wasn't quite clear to me what this all entailed, but again, that's just kind of a standard. And so some of the issues with this is of course looking at just more immediate effects, but this doesn't go into the long-term repercussions. And we also talk about, right, bioaccumulation, and so that doesn't really, that's not studied as well. So what are the long-term bioaccumulation effects, especially as it moves up the food chain? And so other things that can happen with pollution, of course, is a hindrance to marine activities. This could just be physical barriers, and it kind of mentioned that how these physical floating plastic islands now are either hindering marine activities or changing their activities so they could provide new breeding grounds or new grounds for environments to live in. And of course, we say that there's a reduction in the quality of seawater, just usually again from pollutants. So it could be anything. We've mentioned heavy metals. Your book mentions a really important factor. So all like the pills that people take, pharmaceuticals, that's been an interesting one, especially hormones. So this is a huge issue for like water treatment and trying to figure out what to do with this water, is all the hormones, either from like food production or even birth control. So that's become a huge issue as a lot of women are on birth control.
How does that affect the water?
So the problem is they're soluble and then they can't get them out. So it kind of mentions how they do it. And so in retrospect, had I known that our field trip was going to be canceled, I would say check out our Medford water treatment plant. But so let's skip around and let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to find where at least mentioned. So it talks about this sludge. And so general how water treatment works is there's some sort of physical primary treatment, right, where they collect the large debris, you know, toilet paper, big solids, whatever accumulates. But then all those hormones, right, they're soluble, so they just go straight through. And then, so in this case, they mentioned only doing like a secondary treatment. And so that secondary treatment, all this is doing is killing the bacteria. But here, there's no extraction of what would be like organic waste. So anything that's soluble and a pollutant. And so again, just thinking of wastewater and all those hormones. So here, right, there's nothing to get that out. And so that's why a lot of water treatment facilities, they have different like reverse osmosis, different filtration things. So they all have different tricks than to try to get out that organic substances and try to filter that out from the water. But it is labor intensive and difficult. And it's a problem, and it's still through, and so that's a concern.
That's this morning on the national news. I had to leave to come here, but right before the story actually broke out, that they were talking about the hitnol and opiates in the water system.
Oh my gosh.
That's terrible.
And how it's a problem for like, at least it looked like they were back on the East Coast, but how it was affecting every neighborhood's
Wow.
sewer stream, like the water being tested. And they're like rich, poor communities, it didn't matter which neighborhood you were from, it's in every single, like everywhere that they've been testing.
Yeah.
They find trace amounts of amphetamine.
That was just the blurb, I didn't get to see the actual news segment on it.
Yeah.
It was like, when we come back.
Well, it's kind of interesting, the whole wastewater testing thing that you mentioned, because they're trying to test for like COVID tracking through the wastewater now. And of course, you know, I don't want to go too much into like, because the issue is you can detect like a lot of things in the water. So like it's interesting because yeah, you could probably, that's cool that you can find trace fentanyl, but I wonder like what it's saying or what it's.
I was curious about
Yeah, or is it just that like it's getting distributed everywhere, kind of like those hormones, and it's hard to remove, and now it's just like, you know, contaminating our water supply. And then the next question would be like, what percentage is it in there? Like parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion. And then of course, right, how is it tested? Different tests have different sensitivities, but that's still fascinating.
I didn't see who was, I was hoping it was a USGS testing, but I didn't even get that far into it.
Yeah,
Get that
yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Oops. And so this is just more details of, again, those bioassays. So again, we touched on that, so we don't have the long-term effects of the pollution.
Well, I imagine the long-term effects could be like animals dying off and species like that, because like, it
Or
was.
adaptations.
Well, yeah, but there was that, I mean, it's an Alex Jones quote, but he was citing a study about how the fluoride and stuff in the water was causing the asexual creatures not being able to figure out where they were at in their sexual roles.
Yeah.
And being able to reproduce because of the chemicals in the water.
Yeah, I don't think it was fluoride. I could look it up later, but yeah, that is right, that there was like some chemical that was acting as a hormone disruptor. And that goes back, again, I'll circle like hormones, because a lot of things can either be hormones or mimic hormones. And that's like with the issue with the BPA, so that's a hormone disruptor, so it looks like a hormone, so then our body messes it. So yeah, but fluoride, I don't think fluoride has anything to do with the,
Yeah, I maybe just saw, I mixed
Yeah,
it up with.
yeah,
what
but
he
I was
said,
gonna
so
say
he was-
fluoride is a whole nother
Yeah.
bucket entirely that we could talk about and go down the rabbit hole.
So anybody who knows Alex Jones just knows that he just says stuff really loud, and he was quoting a study, I read the study, but it was a long time ago, so.
Yeah,
He said it was making the frogs gay, and.
yeah,
You know, there was like some wild stuff in there, so I just remember reading the study, I don't remember what the chemical actually was, but he said it was fluoride, so.
yeah.
That's what I remember, because he was the loudest part of the.
I'll try to find the chemical, because I don't think it's fluoride, but there are definitely hormone disruptors. Oh, atrazine, that's the one. But yeah, that's certainly a huge issue, is all the hormones disruptor. We could go into how that could be potentially like disrupting our own children in their puberty development. Anyways, we'll move on. And so, of course, waste disposal, historically, right, this was a big part of how we did waste disposal back in the day. Just dump it into the sea, and it would carry it out. And so, of course, right, this practice has still kind of been into play pretty recently. So we'll look at kind of the toxic sludge that was made in the East.
Was considered properly disposed.
Where they never find it.
Well, it's just kind of a silly statement.
No, I mean, I'm laughing because that's the joke of it, is like, how do you properly dispose of it, right? And so that's why some people say like, oh, sure, it's okay, right? The ocean will take care of it. a lot of people, so the alternative is to bury it, right? But it just takes a long time for trash to decompose, especially plastics, and we'll get into that, right? So we kind of created an issue for ourselves. We made this wonderful plastic, and now it doesn't degrade. And we can talk about a little bit about the recycling challenges too, but that's kind of the issue is, yes, how do you properly dispose of?
You just send an MST.
Burn it, that's what we did in Iraq.
That's horrible.
Oh, no, there's plastic burning plants and tire burning plants and that stuff.
That's
That's all
horrible.
we did, burn everything.
Like, I don't care about the CO2 that's released into the environment. I care more about all the other, like, toxic crap that's probably.
Oh, no, we have
really-
breathing problems now because of it.
They pay
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the issue, though, is like burning's bad, and like we really do not have a good solution. I think people are trying to research maybe microbes that could eat through this plastic faster. Yeah, it mentioned mushrooms in the textbook, so just trying to do research on that. But yeah, it's a huge issue because, of course, we kind of touched on it when we mentioned solar panels, but like trying to separate the heavy metals from everything else, that's like the first issue, number one, and who's going to support the labor, hence why usually it happens in China, and then they just burn it to extract the metals, and then you just burn the plastic. So, yeah, huge issue. If you could figure out how to get rich off of trash, like, that's what we need to do. And so again, right, debate about dumping waste into the ocean, irregardless, a lot of waste ends up in there. And so your book kind of divides it into these main types of marine pollution. So we'll look at, of course, petroleum, which is a lot of oil spills, but also natural seepage. Oops. And then sewer sludge, so this is from water being pumped out, so we'll look at the sewer systems. And then we probably are familiar with DDT, and we'll talk about just these. So these are just like benzene and other cyclic aromatic carbon compounds. And then, of course, mercury, we'll talk about that. And then just other.
What's non-point source?
I actually forgot what it's.
I haven't gone that far, I haven't started that chapter yet.
Trying to remember other notable. I think it's just what it classifies as a non-native species, all that non.
It's like runoffs from storm drains, so it's saying. Like other sources such as runoffs and or places in urban areas.
Point is what?
From multiple sources rather than from a single discrete source.
So storm drains,
What page are you guys on?
362,
Yeah.
runoffs. All right, so we'll look at petroleum. And so of course, right, this is oil, and these are all just hydrocarbons. So hydrocarbons are just carbon-based chains. So we'll just draw octane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. So this would be octane, primary component in fuel. So that's just a hydrocarbon, so it's just made up of carbons, hydrogens, can also have oxygen. And so of course, there are often oil spills, and I'm sure we are familiar with some, or from extractions, of course, when they're doing the drilling, you have potential dangers of having a blowout, such as a Deepwater Horizon, if people remember that. And of course, right, loading and unloading, so you can spill. And this was kind of interesting, the Exxon Valdez spill. So, right, it mentions that a lot of oil was spilled over in Alaska. And so some of the initial issues were this area was isolated, so they were unable to clean it up right away. And obviously, the oil kills some species right away, especially the birds, right, because it messes up their feathers. But I did find it interesting that it mentioned that in the cleanup efforts, so if you read in the text, it said that they were like power washing the oil off at really high temperatures at like 60 degrees. And so that kind of killed any marine life on the rocks. And then they compared like beaches that they really cleaned really well versus ones they kind of left. And they felt like the ones that they left alone actually recovered kind of faster. So it brings up some questions of like, how do we clean up oil spills better? So of course, you know, I think everyone's seen the Dawn and cleaning up the little animals, right? That's pretty iconic. And like, that's important because they need their feathers and fur to stay warm. But then it's like, how do we better address like the environmental cleanup, since it will kind of break down naturally? And I think people mentioned, you know, they're exploring mushrooms or other bacteria. So that's a good research area that's still being worked on, is what other bacteria can we use, and also expanding that to plastics. And then of course, right, how to better clean, because you don't want to destroy the environment in your cleanup either, which I think kind of happened in Exxon Valdez. So we could be making the oil spill consequences worse by our cleanup. So just things to think about, how to better capture the oil. And of course, oil is less dense than water, so it floats. And of course, you can see the sheen that it kind of has, all that hydrocarbons.
You should just light it on fire.
I mean, I don't know why they don't light it on fire, at least like on the middle. I don't know if it would get too out of control or what happens.
I imagine that's probably
I
why.
guess it depends how much. Yeah. Cat. And so this just compares all the big oil spills. So there's Exxon Valdez. So they make it look small compared to other issues. And so they mentioned, of course, one of the largest oil releases was during the Persian Gulf War, when the Iraqis intentionally released a bunch of oil. So of course, yeah.
Lighting them on fire and throwing it all away.
That's so sad.
Yep.
But
They won.
such is war, I guess. But and then just comparing other spillage. And let's see. Spillage from natural seeps. So they kind of put natural seeps in there, which doesn't really help you compare. Then it mentions Kuwait. Again, a lot of oil was spilled in the Persian Gulf, so 20 times the amount of Exxon Valdez. And then Deepwater Horizon. Wasn't there a movie about this? Was it called Deepwater Horizon?
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, there was a whole movie on this, the world's largest accidental ocean spill. And so that was off in the Gulf of Mexico. And then there's this other Ixtoc oil spill, so #1 Mexico spill. So again, it was just leaking out from the drilling rig. So it took 10 months to can't read. And so again, it's made out of hydrocarbons, so that contains hydrogen and carbon. And so again, that means that they are organic, and so they do eventually get broken down. Although your book mentions that we're still finding like pockets of oil back from the Exxon Valdez. So I think there's still a lot of questions of exactly how it's broken down in the environment.
When they find the pocket of oil, is it just chilling in the water somewhere, or is it like attached to something?
That's what they didn't really make clear, and I think it would kind of depend too, because you might like expect to see some like just chilling somewhere in a pocket floating, and like yeah, it is gonna float. But yeah, I'm curious, like what if it lands somewhere else, and like would they find it? So they weren't really specific, so that'd be something to look into. Because with that, right, you want to see where is it still existing, you know, why is it existing, where is it degraded, what microbes are there. So all that could kind of help lead you to some research. And then if you want to get into the research of it, you could look into this thing called directed evolution. And so Frances Arnold is pretty famous for this. She recently won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. But basically her research is like putting bacteria in a stressful environment so that most of them die. And then the survivors, right, probably have some cool traits. And then you just keep breeding them to try to get them to do cool stuff. So that would be like how you could do research on that, right? Put little microbes with hydrocarbons or plastics and see who survives. And of course, there can be some toxic compounds in petroleum, and they call them polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And so an example of that would be benzene. So benzene is pretty carcinogenic, and there's a little bit in petroleum. It's a common organic solvent too. And of course, it can just make you sick. So again, these things tend to be carcinogenic. So usually this is with long-term exposure where you could eventually get sick and get cancer or whatever. And so it mentions that they change gene expression. So again, just cancer causing is a huge issue. And then also affects embryo development and survival. So again, going back to how it's mutagenic and probably messes with your DNA. And so cleaning oil spills, like we mentioned, the fur is essential. So any birds or otters need to be cleaned pretty immediately. And we'll do a Dawn commercial again. So they always show Dawn as the one that's good at cleaning, but then obviously a lot of research still on how to best clean up the environment.
Fun fact, if you're out here, poison oak and ivy and stuff, out playing in the woods, Dawn is the best way to get it off, showering Dawn.
What is?
Dawn,
Yeah, if you get those oils on you.
yeah, it's what we always use when we were fighting fires.
When I was a lineman, we did that.
Good to know.
If you're ever painting your house, there's an hair conditioner to get the paint off faster. Fun fact.
Using a water-based or oil paint, or
Any of it.
what's legal out here?
I mean, my house still has lead paint on it.
Oh, man.
When it gets hot, you can smell it.
What,
Those lead pipes too.
what does lead paint smell like?
It's really hard to explain.
Old classroom.
Okay, you gotta invite me over and I'll have to sniff your house.
It's so hard to explain. It's got a really distinct smell.
Super curious. And so this is just showing organisms after the Exxon Valdez spill, but obviously, right, there are other factors. And we'll talk about DDT, especially because I think the DDT probably had more of an effect on the bald eagles than the Exxon Valdez. And other populations are probably already in decline, as it mentions here. All right, so back to the sewer sludge. So we had already touched on this point to answer a question, but again, right, how do we deal with waste? And so some of this semi-solid material too could also contain heavy metals, so that's an issue. How do we get those out? You don't want those in your water, especially bioaccumulating. And so that's mainly the definition of a heavy metal. It's actually harder to find a heavy metal. They don't follow a pattern, but it's just a metal that tends to bioaccumulate and is also like non-essential for your body. And so of course, right, mercury, lead, those are the big ones.
When you say bioaccumulate, what exactly does that mean?
It just means that your body like can't get rid of it. So the problem is like if you take like a bunch of mercury, then yeah, how does your body get it out of there? So it tends to like stay in your tissues. And then I think alternative medicine is like super into this, like the toxin removing thing. I don't know how founded that science is, but right, that's what people are trying to do is like get rid of that. And if you were to be like poisoned with metals, I'd have to look up like what the cure is, but like they do have some treatments to try to help people that are poisoned. Like recently, there was a thallium poisoning. So some grad student was poisoned by thallium. And I don't remember what they gave him, but they gave him something to try to like get out that thallium from his body. He was like undergoing some sort of treatment. But yeah, it depends on what the compound is, and there's some sort of like treatment to try to, they call it a chelating agent, so the heavy metal would be attracted to that and then come out. But again, it's difficult.
Maybe not as harmful as leaving it in there, but
Yeah, it's just hard to do because it's just like once it's in your body, it's just like hard to figure out how to get it out. And yeah, we'll talk more about it. So let's see, let's at least look at the sewage sludge disposal. And so I think this is more historically, they were dumping out all their sewer waste into the ocean. And then eventually they kind of realized maybe that's not the best thing to do. Although I think your book mentions that they might have just extended a pipe a little further to get it like away from the shoreline. At least that was one solution.
That's properly disposing. Just not in the stormwaters.
Yeah, just so people can't see it. We don't want to scare away the
I don't
tourists.
mind.
Yeah.
I always think of The Simpsons, when it's right outside town, there's that big pipe that's just pumping all the nuclear waste into the water.
Yeah, it's yeah, like not to open up more rabbit holes, but yeah, like that's an issue with all our like national laboratories and others. Any lab that does radioactive research, like all the waste that's dumped, like some of that's improperly done. Like that was exposed. Gosh, what fire was it in California? It was like out. It was like right where there was a radioactive research site. And it was like really bad, and it kind of exposed the bad practices because the fire like was on the site, and then it released like radioactive isotopes too into the air. But I'm just totally blanking on the fire in the site right now. It was only like 2-3 years ago.
I guess I've just been preoccupied with all our fires.
Yeah, I mean there's so many fires, so I only took note of it because I thought I wanted to work at a national lab. I was like, nah, maybe their safety isn't that good. Yeah, so what is proper disposal? So still trying to figure that out. And then after this, they started burying the waste, which, again, we could go down the rabbit hole of where do you bury it, because that's another issue, right? No one wants waste in their backyard. So it's always, let's send it to a desert state or somewhere that doesn't care. So trash is a huge issue. And so here's the Boston Harbor Sewage Project. I think your book also mentioned this turned pretty expensive or something. It didn't say like their annual trash bill was like $1,500 or $1,200, something ridiculous. At least I thought it was ridiculous.
1,200.
And so that's like another issue just to think about, right? I I think, aren't we increasing, they just voted to increase our Medford sewer utility, didn't they?
Yeah, they said that we're gonna have to get a whole, like, new system, and it's supposed to jack the price up quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about it for our area.
I was reading it, yeah. And they said that if they don't do it, it was approved by city council. They said if they don't do it, then the state's gonna come out with fines that are gonna make it more expensive for us, supposedly.
Well,
But,
we won't go into all the fines, but
oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. I was just talking about this like last week or
I
something.
feel like that's a silly thing to worry about right now. Considering Portland and Salem are just open sewage streets now. Anyways,
It's like $100 a month, like, it should be more on your bill or something. It's something crazy, it's a high percentage they're gonna tap to homeowners around the area.
yeah. But that's, I mean, right, where's the balance? So it's always, again, that's why I always say, right, you gotta get involved in your local issues, because obviously, right, it takes money to invest in this infrastructure and keep it maintained. I think that's the local argument too. But, you know, it's always like, at what cost? How can we keep this down? So it's a very difficult solution and problem, you know, so we don't have easy answers. That's why, what is proper waste disposal? Because the more proper you do it, the more expensive it costs. So it's quite a conundrum.
They didn't release a cost analysis sheet, like explaining exactly what they're gonna do. They just said we need a new system, so.
yeah, we'll do those little tax this much and then we'll get the lowest bidder.
There are always issues. So anyways, people, are y'all familiar with DDT? So this was, yeah, you probably are, I'm also getting far removed from it. I was not alive either. So back probably like in the 70s, I think it was, so they used a lot of DDT, or I think earlier than that. Yeah, so.
I saw those going up.
So they used to spray heavily for DDT, especially on like all the crops. And of course what started happening is they noticed the effect on bird populations. And so most noticeably the issue was the thin eggshells that the DDT caused. And so of course this caused also a lot of decline in populations, as obviously the eggs didn't survive. And so luckily, so this is at least a positive story, that they banned the use of DDTs, and a lot of the bird populations have since recovered, so that's, oh yeah. And so we also mentioned those PCBs, so polychlorinated biphenyls. And so these can just be found in different like coolants, insulations. So these are just another organic, so more aromatic base, so biphenyls would kind of look something like that. And so again, more carcinogens, so they can be just in a bunch of different things, so caulking, right, any sort of hydraulic oils. So they usually just do a mixture of different like hydrocarbons and these type of materials, trying to get the right consistency, so you'll find that in there. But again, you can kind of see if it has that aromatic structures in it, those can also cause genetic mutations. And so they've been banned by a lot of the countries, but of course, they're pretty pervasive, so they've been found everywhere, even where they were not explicitly put. So again, these chemicals, right, circulate throughout the environment, just like we've seen, you know, with our air currents, our ocean currents, so all that spreads chemicals everywhere. And so methylmercury, So this would be in like small amounts, the methyl mercury that you find in the water. But I did at least want to do a fun fact. So like methyl mercury, so that's methyl mercury. So most organomercuries though are toxic, or at least in some forms, if they're simple mercury compounds like this. And so there's actually like horror stories of this chemist. So there was this chemist, and she wanted to methylate something. I'm not sure why she needed such a strong methylating agent, because you can use other reagents that add methyl groups. But she needed, oh, why did I draw it with a HG? Sorry. And for some reason, she chose mercury, methyl mercury, and she got a drop of mercury on her glove. I don't even know if she noticed it or didn't think much of it. And then like several months later, she started having all these like neurological issues and like, you know, totally going out of control. And so basically the problem with methyl mercury is it starts just methylating like you, so that's bad.
That's what the Mad Hatter's based on.
I actually don't.
Because they used to shape their hats with that stuff.
With methyl mercury?
And they used to like dye them, and that's how they got those big top hats.
Oh.
And I guess that was what the Mad Hatter was based on, was like mercury poisoning and causing them to go loony.
Oh, yeah. I don't know that they would use methyl mercury, because methyl mercury is like highly toxic. But probably some sort of mercury-based compound. Yeah, that was an issue. But yeah, this poor chemist, she ended up dying of the effects of mercury, so they weren't able to help her.
How long ago was that?
This was recently. I'd have to look up the
Oh,
article.
well, then there's no excuse why stupid kids win stupid prizes.
Yeah.
Mercuric nitrate.
Oh, for the Mad Hatter. Yeah. Oh. So I guess it's been a while now. It was in 1997, but we were well aware that mercury was dangerous. So, and it was in Dartmouth College.
What was she trying to achieve?
I don't even know if it says. Let's see. Oh, she was just trying to get an NMR of dimethylmercury. That's strange.
What's that?
An NMR is just like a pretty picture, but I'm pretty sure maybe they didn't have references at the time. Because this is an NMR spectrum. So now with all the data, oh, this is a mercury NMR, whatever. So this is what an NMR looks like. So this one's a mercury NMR, but it stands for nuclear magnetic resonance, and it's basically a huge magnet. And what it does, it like aligns all the electrons up and then releases them. And then it's the relaxation of them and how long it takes for them to like unalign that you get basically a pretty picture.
Why is that necessary?
So you can identify compounds. So every compound has like a distinct NMR. So then you can like tell the identity. So I'm not sure why she wanted a spectrum of dimethylmercury. So she was trying to use it as a reference for whatever research, but to me it seems silly, but this was in 97, but like nowadays you just usually can find most of these on Google. So it's kind of strange to me, but.
So what happened to her?
So she was trying to prepare an NMR sample, so that would entail like putting a little drop in an NMR tube. And she just got one little drop on her glove. But the problem is that compound, well, it's going to go through your glove anyways. So a lot of organic compounds like are still soluble through the gloves. They don't really buy you that much time. Like they just buy you a little bit of time. And that's for like hardcore chemistry stuff. But yeah, basically it passed through her glove and then was absorbed by her body. And they didn't think about anything at the time.
Yeah, her blood levels were 80 times higher
Yeah.
than the threshold for toxicity.
Yeah, so it was like 5 months later when they noticed, so pretty scary.
Iraq used it as a fungicide. It was killing the mushrooms.
That seems strange.
Here I am thinking, loops back to mushrooms.
Yeah. Anyway, stay away from organomercury compounds.
I mean, is that easy just to fall upon?
Yeah, you shouldn't really find mercury.
Well, I was just wondering, like, I mean, do I have to go looking for it, or?
Yeah, you probably have to go looking for it.
Because you just made it sound like, it was like, yeah, don't mess with that, don't play with it. It's like,
I don't know. I don't know where you're gonna end up. You could end up in a lab where, like, you never know, like the knowledge of a PI, and they could like say go play with toxic stuff, not realizing like you always have to be careful. Oh, and then anyways, so mercury. So they defined it as also causing this Minamata disease. And so this was due to a lot of mercury being released in Japan. And so that, of course, caused a lot of neurological disorders, as you might have imagined. It's not really a disease. I wouldn't classify it as a disease personally, just more effect of all that poisoning. So that's pretty sad. So we mentioned these terms, so they'll probably crop up. So bioaccumulation, and so that's just organisms concentrate pollutant from a seawater. And so just like we mentioned with those bottom feeders, or the organisms that live a long time, like tuna, so it has a long time to bioaccumulate. And then biomagnification is when, of course, we eat the tuna and then get all those heavy metals concentrated in our body.
So we fall under the biomagnification, what you just said?
Yeah, and by eating it. And then, oh, sorry. And then, so we had mentioned this with that fish chart from last chapters of, you know, kind of what's safe to eat. And so all that's from is just like guesstimating, right, like how much fish we tend to eat. And so notice by country, they have it different safe levels. So the US has a higher level since we tend to eat less fish, like compared to Sweden or Japan. So of course Japan, right, they eat a lot of sushi there. So they have slightly lower limits of methylmercury. And then again, that's why they say like, oh, pregnant women shouldn't eat tuna or whatever. But again, just everything in moderation. So you can probably still enjoy some tuna too if you're pregnant. Just again, everything in moderation. And that's how they determine it. And so there's your non-point source pollution. So just any poison runoff. So could also be like road runoff. And so this is where I'll remind people of using, what's it called, like the salt on the road. So we've mentioned this before in this class, how that's bad because it'll enter the streams and of course contaminate your fresh water. But here, looks like your government's on top of that and they use those red.
There's a whole lot less rust. In like East Coast where they still salt the roads and all that.
Yeah,
They
that's.
get a lot more rust. We also, though, we use that lava rock or whatever, and we have more dents and scratches.
Mm.
Other things that come with throwing rocks all over the freeway.
Yeah. Well, I think it's better than, at least the
I imagine
horror
so. It's
stories.
still probably better than the salt.
Yeah, I just hear horror stories. I've never lived in the East, but like they're always saying they have to wash off your car.
I had friends that did body shops, classic cars, all those kind of things in Florida, and it's a biggie to get West Coast cars because the whole eastern seaboard, like Florida, just eats cars.
Your undercarriage is just rust and
Holes
just,
and
Yeah.
It gets back sweet water there.
Oh, I didn't think it was salt water.
No, they put salt on the roads. When
Yeah.
it freezes, they put a ton of salt on the roads, so all that salt gets kicked
I
up.
know we do that here in Oregon too, so
No,
what's the
Oregon put a stop to it
Sand.
several years ago.
Sand
They use
and
sand
gravel.
and lava rock.
Oh, because even the YMCA that I used to work at puts salt all
Well,
over the
yeah, you're gonna have
parking
little
lots.
businesses and stuff that do
Yeah.
upstairs, so they're gonna do massive.
Sidewalks and
Oh,
walkways,
okay.
but not the
So how does the
30-yard
salt
dump truck.
on the road affect the cars?
It oxidizes, it turns to rust.
Yeah, it speeds up that oxidation process.
That's what they tell you if you're moving over there, sell your car here and then just buy one that's already
They
messed
put
up.
it down for ice and snowy conditions, it's like with the water and then your wheels kick it up.
And even though they don't do it here, I still, because of the East Coast, I still drive my car through the car wash like every couple weeks in the winter time. Like, just because people do put it in their neighborhoods and stuff still, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just have big trucks driving everywhere dumping it.
And let's see, and I think you all have a good handle on the pesticides and fertilizers, how those end up running off, and of course, anything else on the road. And so again, difficult to pinpoint the origin, so all that trash, eventually it can make its way to the ocean. I'm not quite sure how the drains are set up here. I know, like in California, they kind of mark which ones like eventually lead to the ocean, so you're like not supposed to put trash down there. I mean,
You'll see a steel.
I know in my neighborhood it says,
Sidewalk if it's a,
okay, I hadn't seen that. I
my
was curious.
neighborhood says it goes to Bear Creek.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
you'll say it goes to like a tributary or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it says do not dump.
You'll have a
Street goes to
trout
Bear
or
Creek.
a steelhead or something on there.
Yeah, a little
It's
fish float.
Steelhead water, don't dump soaps and
Yeah.
oils and methyl mercury in it.
It's silly though, because you're gonna get some anyways, just from road runoff, from leaking cars and. So you're
Yeah.
already getting a
Just
ton
to
of
minimize.
toxin.
Yeah.
Not that you should just do it anyways, but I mean.
Yeah, I
We're
mean,
already doing
It
it.
shouldn't be flowing into that. There should be some sort of filtration process to at least help,
yeah, I mean,
which is expensive, so that's why we don't do it.
Well, it's going to Bear Creek.
it's-
I mean,
no one cares about Bear Creek.
Look what's going on there.
But, I mean, these are good things to think about, is like, how do we better plan for the future in our infrastructure, like, at least around Medford, Bear Creek looks always pretty grody, so it's like, how
It wasn't
can we?
always like that. I wouldn't let my kid play in it now.
Yeah, so you could play in it at one point,
Yeah, my wife grew up playing in it.
oh, that's
I
sad.
grew up in Santa Cruz, so I didn't have it, which used to be clean. They used to go swimming in like little, parts of it, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't now. It's gross. We have our own little Ganges River.
I know, it's terrible. We're talking about these issues in class and then we go look at them right outside. Like, we gotta do something. And so now we have, of course, rules and regulations to try to help with this. We could again argue about the effectiveness of these rules, and a lot of time they can sometimes create more issues, more fines. Do they actually solve the problem? And so there's all these rules, so 3 miles from shore, you can't dump all these things. Of course, right, trying to protect the beaches, but probably also, right, tourism interests, hence why you always want to protect the shore. And plastic, though, notice how that's always kind of illegal. And then that plastic lining material, so that's all an issue.
It's so funny, it's like, oh, okay, so if I go outside of 25 miles, I can do paper, rags, glass.
Right.
If you're far enough, you can do whatever you want. 'cause nobody has
Garbage.
to-
I mean.
Yeah.
That is naughty off the shore.
Yeah, how many? I know, I'm trying to.
it's not far. Keep in mind.
Broccoli, that's too funny. Yeah, let's not dump anything into it, I don't know, that sounds like a good rule.
Right. Yeah, and then of course, you just brought up a good point that if you go far enough out, so later in your text, you know, it mentions that you just have like international waters, so at that point, right?
The Wild West, do what you want.
Which is terrible. So yes, what were you saying? Proper procedures. just keep driving. Yeah, obviously you guys recognize, you know, this is not a solution, and this goes back into recycling and.
See, I think it should be the opposite. I think we should dump everything within 3 miles and let everyone have to deal with that and see how gross and terrible it is, and then maybe we'll fix it. I mean, let people live in their own filth.
Well.
We do that in other countries and it doesn't seem to do anything.
Yeah, and I was like, Portland is starting to live in its own filth, and I don't know that's how that's working yet, but yeah. And plastics, the plastics might be one of my favorite topics to be, that keeps me up at night now. So plastics, of course, are wonderful things in the sense that they're polymers, and so that's why they're so strong, is chemists were making these polymerization reactions, and then you can chain all these little monomers together to create these plastics, and yay, they don't break or anything, but of course they're also not really biodegradable, so that's also an issue. We always see, of course, the famous pictures of fish getting choked in there, or plastic bags, or there's always,
Straw.
yeah, the turtle with the straw.
I saw something recently that said that it's wild how humans have made such a strong subject that doesn't break, or such a strong object that doesn't break down, and we decided that we're gonna use it for single-use products.
Yeah, that's the issue that keeps me up at night. It's like, yeah, we made this great product, and then, yeah, we're gonna use it everywhere, so now, what do we do? And then y'all were on top of the ball with your current events this morning. And so if you haven't seen this in the news, here it is. And so I pulled up the actual study. I can also pull up a little bit easier to read article. So I kind of like Science Daily. It at least usually tries to point to the original source, unlike some of the other mainstream media. But I do always recommend, of course, looking at the primary source, who did the research. Let's see, is it a PDF? I think this one might be available so you can read it. And so this just mentions that they were looking for those PFAs. So PFAs are a pretty hot buzzword currently. So those PFAs are those perfluoroalkyl substances, such as like your coating on nonstick pans, but those have been determined to be toxic. But they find that in order to make these materials water repellent, they add PFAs. So, and then they compare the PFA concentration. And so that could be potentially harmful. And so you could, of course, look at the research. And then here's comparing. So you can at least just skip to the meat. And so different PFAs, so we'd have to look and decode what these specific PFAs are. But you can at least just kind of compare that a lot of these paper straws tend to have more PFAs than at least the plastic they compared. So stainless steel looks really good, so that's a good option. You don't want.
Fall on it.
Well, you know, you gotta weigh your risk.
I hate those things, put them in the washer,
Yeah, they just,
then they catch and turns off.
Oh, that's why I don't put my stainless steel straws in the washer.
My kids do.
we get FDA approved.
I like to say it makes when you drink, make it cold, so it keeps the colder, whatever liquid you're drinking.
But
You have to get the little pipe.
yeah. So,
I just
anyways.
wrote on my 6-year-old walking around with her drinking her
Then you just have to use plastic straws. I don't know.
Why not just get silicone straws? We let her use rubber straws.
Yeah, they didn't test silicone.
Those are good, too.
Yeah, what about just pure silicone straws?
Yeah.
We get the FDA approved like soda tubing that they use for the syrup, so we just cut our own straws.
Oh,
And then we use
interesting.
them for about a year and throw them away.
Cool.
We melt them.
And so the other issue with the plastic, so I don't like this word attract, I would say dissolve. And so all that's because they're both hydrocarbon based. So plastics, right, if they're made out of, they're mainly petroleum based. And so they're all hydrocarbons. And so that means that they're organic-y. And so anything organic-y, then they kind of tend to dissolve. So that just means that plastic can absorb any toxins like DDT or the PCBs or anything else that's floating around and can absorb. And so, of course, these are all the famous pictures of animals dying and crap. And so, of course, right, just do your part, try to cut the little plastic soda things. This is also why they've kind of made like new ones that are biodegradable. Oh, cool. Yeah, I haven't seen the serrated. That's cool though. So lots of different options that they're trying to do. Of course, now I wonder with the biodegradable if they don't have any PFAs or anything. And so like you mentioned, you know, it's a pretty good observation that, oh yeah, we made this thing that's pretty indestructible, but then we're going to use it everywhere. So it was made in like the 1860s, and then they ramped up production during World War II with less rubber being available, and so then plastic was ramped up, and of course it's relatively strong and lightweight and durable, but of course that can be good or bad depending on what you're thinking about it. Obviously it's inexpensive, so mass produced. Currently, have you guys heard of Temu or whatever? Yeah, this is like the death of everything. So, I mean, all these, right, so much plastic goes into single use, is buying, you know, our consumer culture.
Oh, is that like the Wish app?
Yeah.
It's like cheap Chinese-made products.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's the Wish version of Wish.
It's a Wish. I don't even know Wish, but yeah, all I know is like Chinese-made products and all that's, you know, ton of plastic, not to mention the footprint of shipping it over. Alibaba too, all those huge manufacturers.
I don't know, I think China's like, we're already super polluted, we just gave up. Because I think they're like, what, 5 times more polluted than the US?
I'm not sure of that. Like, probably. I've heard figures too that I think like 50% of all the petroleum is in plastic production, and a lot of that's in China. So.
Aren't they like trying to start making serious changes though? Like they're starting to become more aggressive than even the US in terms of global warming changes and like
I think they might be saying that
environmental. No.
just to look better than
Yeah.
because they have a really bad reputation right now.
So I've heard mixed things. So I've heard that they've done some pretty big strides on like the nuclear power plants, so they're trying to do that, and even some like turbines, they've been working on that. But the problem is, of course, they're still just trying to industrialize and bring electricity, so they're still burning a lot of like coal still, and so like, yeah, even though they're trying to be better and look better, like they're still going to be producing a
Well,
lot
they're
of
doing silly
CO2.
things like creating these entire cities that are empty,
Yeah.
like building buildings and infrastructure of just completely desolate, like ghost towns. And so, I mean, that can't be great for the environment with all the resources and energy that they're putting into that.
Yeah.
So it looks like they're growing, and it's like a Ponzi
It's like a
scheme
city
of
like the
like
size
getting
of
like
Los
global
Angeles, and
investors
there's
to
nobody
get
in it.
involved.
Yeah, I've seen some of the pictures. It's crazy.
All the fake malls and,
Yeah, that's North Korea.
and,
There's a lot of the Asian cultures, like Japan's huge for it. Like, we were watching a thing like, ooh, maybe we'll move there when we're a little older. A lot of the things, it's houses, instead of like, oh, we'll remodel that, it's kind of like, we will get a new one. Like, it's sort of like wearing old shoes to school or whatever. It's how they view a lot of their housing situation.
Really?
Yeah, so instead of like, we'll refurbish this, it's like, especially for status, it's to have something new, you know, it's
However,
an
their
apartment
houses
or
are
whatever.
like the
But when
US,
something gets
so they're a
old,
lot
people just move
cheaper.
away from it.
So
There's a bunch
they
of
only last
places
about
in
maybe
Japan
5
you
to
can
10
go,
years.
and
What?
they're starting to have
Yeah.
programs for
That's
people,
the whole
it's like, oh,
kind
if you
of
don't mind the dishonor of
They
living in an old
rebuild and
house,
stuff like that.
you can have a free one.
They have like a lot of
Some
paper
abandoned
doors and
properties,
paper
they
walls
will
on them,
fix
stuff
it
like
up.
that. So
They
like they're
actually live
built
there.
with very
But yeah, then
cheap
they're,
products to just keep
they
it,
don't,
you know?
like ours, the housing's such a
They
big
also
thing
stack
for
people
personal
like
wealth
they're
and
high.
equity.
So,
Over there, it's, the property values aren't really stacked that way. Like, you can get a pretty nice little farmhouse in Japan for 100,000 or 200,000.
Nice.
But it's also a reason I think that when you buy like an older house and stuff, it goes for like dirt cheap because nobody really wants it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
They spend a whole lot of money on funny treats though.
On what?
They just have like knickknacks and
Uh,
like snacks and Kit Kats and like their pop culture over there is so important to them.
yeah.
Like it's like a huge deal for them over there.
Yeah, aesthetics are a big deal. Like the
Also-
perfect cantaloupe. Get you some money.
Yeah, my house only lasts 5 minutes.
Also, there's a good question in the chat. They asked, what is worse, burning, burying, or dumping the plastic? What would be better?
Burying, I'd say.
I would probably say burning, but I mean, you can only dig so deep.
Yeah. So I think that's hard to
Burning's
answer.
definitely the question, unless it's like
Otherwise,
Or
if you,
like
burning.
make
Have
the
you-
soil toxic or
Well-
add a bunch of plastics
well,
in it?
most of it's inert, like if you got big chunks of it and you actually bonded it, so it wasn't going to be microplastics
If you
and
wrapped
such
it in
volume.
plastic.
Yeah.
Just burn it
If you
underground.
shrink wrapped it and buried it, but, no, if you bonded it and had it within a matrix and buried it, that would be the least environmentally interactive way to do it.
I guess because then you would have less of a, you wouldn't have all the stuff inside the cube touching. So you'd have just the.
Yeah, but because the issue,
By the dispersal, like it's gonna disperse a lot slower through dirt than it is in microparticles and fluid that has currents.
yeah, but you also want the trash to break down though. So usually you want to like separate it. So that's kind of the issue too. If you compact it too much and there's no like oxygen, then there's no way for like little microbes to work their way and break down
Well, if
trash.
it's just plastic, microbes aren't really gonna work on it very much anyway.
They might work,
I
but
think scientists are making microbes that
Yeah.
Then where are the options to sending it to space?
well, there's already a lot of trash in space too.
Yeah.
That's becoming an issue.
It's
Shoot
just
it at the
huge.
sun.
Shoot it at the sun. But yeah, if so, the other thing is you want to expose plastic to the sun because that will eventually break it down. So it takes a long time. So it still can take like, hundreds of years. But the UV rays are what help break down those bonds chemically, actually.
Into
So-
microplastics.
So you're not just like, no, not into microplastics. So that's the key, is the sun actually physically finally breaks the bond into the monomers versus the microplastics where they're not being broken into the monomers, where it is just a physical separation. Yeah, so it's, but it just takes so long, so it's kind of, yeah, so it's kind of an issue on what to do, and yeah, there's only so much you can bury too, and once you fill up a site, then you gotta find a new site, and
I mean, I guess if you found a place where you could safely melt it down and burn it, like, if you had like all the filters and you had all the ways to like keep it from getting out into society, out into the world, maybe that would be a viable, because you could turn it into like 3D printing filament, or you could turn it into, other things that, recycling actually used to be taken serious. Now, Medford, you can recycle like 2 things in your can. You can't even put a magazine in there anymore. It just goes in the trash.
Stupid.
So,
yeah. Yeah, and then,
I think there's a country in like one of the other countries like that
Oh, see, that would be cool. And I don't know,
DeLorean,
what?
like the DeLorean, like using it as fuel.
I think it kind of looks like that, but.
Yeah, I think it's probably more like biomass. So probably just like burning trash to fuel whatever turbines or whatever
Yeah,
they
it's
have
pretty much
going.
something like that and stuff, and they've made it so efficient and stuff where they don't have a lot of trash, and they actually have to import from other countries to
Yeah.
fuel their power plants now.
I mean,
You put plastic in like compost bins where it gets really, really, really hot.
I'm not sure if that would degrade it though, because it still needs more like the UV light, because plastic, so the other issue with like recycling, so you know the little symbols, because you got 1, 2.
Yeah.
And so the lower numbers tend to be more recyclable. So like 1 can like go into 2 basically. But then as you start getting like higher up or certain numbers, like they can't be converted. Like styrofoam is just like its own thing. Like it has a different functional group, so it can't like be recycled into something else. So that's kind of the issue. And so I don't remember what we recycle here. It's pretty limited though.
Cardboard.
Mine-
Cardboard.
And like
Yeah.
1.
Well,
Yeah.
where I'm
Cardboard's
in
another
Grants
one.
Pass, they won't take the corrugated, you have to go bring it physically.
Oh, my-
So, yeah, they don't take glass, they don't,
Geez.
it's like tons of
Well,
stuff.
so everybody still does it how you used to be able to do, so you're just throwing trash away now. So that whole truck is contaminated, so they just dump it in the landfill anyways. So that recycle.
Not that one.
When I moved down here from Portland, like my first 4 weeks, I got 4 warnings. They were about to cancel my recycling.
Yeah, and then they charge you for
Yeah,
it
they
too,
charge
and
you
they take
$5
your,
a can.
and then they take, at where I'm at, I think it's like $25 or $35, and then they take the can from you, and you're not allowed to recycle anymore.
Yeah.
No joke's on you, I don't anyways. And obviously that's a problem where people are just, like the guy who lives with my father-in-law will just put everything, he'll be like, oh, a pizza box with food on it, yeah, it's corrugated, but it's got food waste, so it's not recyclable.
Right,
Yeah.
A macaroni and cheese box or his White Claw boxes, they're not recyclable because it's not corrugated.
Yeah.
But if you take it to, there's a place in town that sells all of it to China, so,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, what is it, it's over by, Schnitzer's Wrecking Yard. Was it Avenue G?
Wow, that's good to know.
There's a place they take clothing, magazines, anything that you can't take to the dump and recycle it, they'll take for free, and then they sell it all to China.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm sure they burn it into whatever, your
Yeah.
Alibaba stuff.
Yeah. And then the chat mentioned that there's a dump in White City off of Table Rock, so I don't know.
Yeah,
anyone-
that's the dump that runs the recycling, the road disposal. That's,
Footprint, like doing it too.
yeah, so they're the ones that are actually in charge of what you can recycle in this town.
Interesting. I mean, it's a huge issue. I don't know, if you guys could invest in recycling, to solve the problems.
Well, I think also, because like, also like even like kind of like, recycling like a small part, you really need to do the other 2 R's to really make it effective, which is reduce and reuse. But
Well-
recycling was kind of like, oh, we can just recycle and
Yeah.
just blankets over the problem, but it's like most of recycling is just, it's like, some of it's usable, but like a lot of it's not.
Yeah. So he brings up other good points of, so I forgot about those 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. But, yeah, I mean, we're all guilty of this with our culture, that we're always like buying new crap every day.
Not you doing the reduce or reuse enough.
Yeah, and even, I mean, there's planned obsolescence that we could get into. I probably can't spell obsolescence, right? Where machines don't last like they used to. Like, probably your grandma always says that too. Like, she's had her washing machine since 1950 or whatever.
Yeah, it takes 8 hours to dry. I mean,
And nowadays, when brand new water heater will break the first year.
Yeah.
Apple just now like settled a lawsuit or something to that effect where they have to pay money to people whose phones were like affected by their upgrades. to make it
Oh,
better.
yeah,
So
the
battery
slowdowns.
thing, Yeah.
I was gonna think,
AT&T for the slowdown.
was, working with, Google's thing on the Chromebooks, cause how they phase them out in bits and pieces. I said like, well, if we made them
Wow.
Well, Ford did that in like the 40s and 50s, where they got caught and sued for making parts intentionally break,
Oh, man.
like after a certain amount of time. Not a catastrophic failure, like
Yeah.
somebody's gonna die, but like, oh, we're gonna use, shafts in this, the drivetrain that are gonna strip or break after a certain amount of time, and then they'll have to replace it. So, but now, like, how many iPhones have we had in the last 5 years? I mean, no one, people line up for hours, they get rid of their phone that's still good. My wife's had the same phone for like 6 years.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And the phones, like, people forget, like, those are expensive. They have all the heavy metals in there. So it's not just like the cost. It's like, think about the labor costs that went into like actually making that
Personal
phone.
labor was really cheap.
That was the big
Yeah.
thing with the Chromebooks.
Well-
The stacks of them, because they had to just trash them, because they make them so they're not upgradable, they won't receive the new thing.
Yeah.
You can't even,
They can
you
get-
can't replace the battery in these anymore.
They can get older Mac and Windows systems, or like a 15-year-old Mac will run the Chromebooks platform, but a 6-year-old Chromebook won't run the Chromebook platform, and that's all they're geared towards. They won't use anything else, so early they make all the school systems scrap them, buy new ones.
That's a
And-
scam.
Hey, get ready for
Yeah.
this,
And then
kids'
they
tablets
really
break in like a year and a half, just off the use alone, so it's like every.
Oh my gosh.
Well, but just look what Medford did, so we got all those, when we went from the cop cars are a great example, is we went from those, what were they,
Crown
the Crown Vics to the Chargers, and then within like 2 years, we had these SUVs.
Huh.
So they just dumped all that money into that fleet. And 2 years later, they had to get new ones. I mean, people were using those Crown Vics since like the
Yeah.
early 90s to late, 2010s. And then all of a sudden, we're having to switch vehicle, our tax dollars are paying for these vehicles that are still
They gotta get
just
built.
fine. So.
Hey, they live in those cars, okay?
Well,
Okay,
they
should
got,
take care of them, make them last longer.
they got a lot of federal subsidies with Ford to upgrade to the Explorers too. It's federal.
Oh, and Dodge did that with the Chargers too.
We're always paying, is what I hear.
My friends had one of his roommates' dad was a Washington lobbyist. And boy, was his dad rich.
No.
Come down and visit, and it was, let's face it, it was just one of the most ridiculously rich people I ever met. And his dad was, that was what he did, was he lobbied.
That goes into like another rabbit hole of what's wrong with our government. But yeah, we'll focus back to nurdles for a second.
Right on time.
And so all nurdles are small little plastic pellets of plastic that can be melted into whatever cheap item of the day. And so of course this tends to be found in ocean and the beaches due to spillage. So going back to all those cargo ships trying to navigate the sea. And so this is my favorite topic, is microplastics. And so these are just the micro beads, and so like we mentioned, they're just defined by their size, so they just become mechanically smaller. So I'll add that.
Oh, what if you could, okay, so sorry, this just made me think of it. What if you took the plastic and you were able to grind it up into like a granule, and you could use it for like sandblasting and stuff, and that doesn't get rid of it, at least it's reusing it for something. You have these,
Yeah.
Colonel has one at his shop, it's like a contained box that he can spray parts with glass beads and sand, and it just gets recycled through a vacuum back into the tank.
Yeah, I'm not sure if microplastics would work for that, like if they'd be hard enough or that would cause other issues, like blasting them.
It's hard to collect at those two points, isn't it? I mean, how are they? I mean,
So
the
do,
ones that are already out there, I mean, I guess if you're
Yeah.
them to make them into microbeads, but ones that are already in the environment.
Well, I figure we'd start fresh.
we start.
I mean, at this point, we can't think
It makes
about
more
things
dried
that are
out.
already out there.
But yeah, you bring up a really good point, and so the problem is how do we get them out of the environment? And this is a problem that's plaguing chemists, is because we don't know what to do. And I don't know if you've heard the studies, right, like they find it in the air now, like these little microplastics can be transported on the air and like end up everywhere. Like they're literally everywhere on Earth. It's pretty terrifying.
Can they take plastic and melt it down and turn it into other plastics?
Well, that's what they do with the recycling, right? But again, there's only like limits to that, so you can only recycle so many times, so they can only be like blown, and then certain things are more recyclable than others. So we'd have to go through like all the codes, but we're not.
Sometimes plastics, when they get hot, they just get hard and turn into a rock, and they can't.
Right, and then that's its next form, though. It's like, yeah, you can blow it once, and then it's like done. So, but yeah, the problem with the microplastics is they're so small, so like really they can't filter them. So that is the issue, is like they go through the water, and so something that you may not even think about. So I myself, I'm wearing synthetic fiber currently, so that could be like nylon, rayon, so all those are synthetic, and we could make nylon in lab, so that's very easy to make. But the problem with that, okay, so then you wash your clothes. Well, the little fibers in your clothes, right, that gets washed into the water. That's all microplastics if you're wearing synthetic fibers. So that's another source of plastics, and then it goes back to the water treatment issue. So how does a water treatment plant, are they able to filter out the microplastics? The answer is probably not. So that's an issue. So then it ends up in our drinking water. It ends up in like the tissues of fish. They found it like, you know, like everywhere, like in our bodies too, in our lungs potentially. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So they, I think they've come up with an alternative one that's not supposed to be as bad or not, just but.
Yeah, it's an issue, and so all this can bioaccumulate. It's even like, you know, if you see some of those exfoliating beads, some of those could be microbeads, so you probably don't want to use them. So you want to stick to like natural exfoliators like walnuts or whatever they use, or so that.
Oh my gosh, there's, my fiance, was working at a house, the whole driveway was walnut shells.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was, he took a picture, and it was so gorgeous, it was so pretty. So they were using, yeah, I don't know how they got a hold of it, but
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, walnut, that's a lot better. Don't they have like walnut cat litter now too? It's supposed to be like natural and safer. And then, so other, of course, issues. So right with COVID, I think people panicked and were, you know, had a lot of PPE and masking and all that. And so this became a huge issue. So I pulled up one paper. Here's another paper. Oops. I wanted to show both of those. Try that again. Just trying to move you over. But so these are some other issues. Again, talking about microplastics. So you have kind of the issue with the mask as well, is of course, like they're made of polystyrene, so all that is microplastics, and you're potentially breathing in a ton of microplastics. Yeah, not to mention they're not very effective, and so and so of course this has really been a huge issue. I don't know if you guys have seen this in the news with like, now we don't know what to do with all this waste from the PPE, and so that really wasn't sustainable. And so let's see, I'm trying to see blah, blah, blah. So of course, tons of plastics. Most plastics are not recycled. And well, you can read about it more. But oh, here it at least mentions what it's made from all this PPE, so polypropylene, polyacrylonitrile, polystyrene, polyethylene, terephthalate, so all these are just hydrocarbons, different plastics. And so again, all of that, same problem, what do we do? And so, right, they mentioned the UV radiation, but again, that's not realistic on the scale and time frame that we're talking about. And then, of course, you can get those microplastics. So they said mass can rapidly increase the accumulation of related microparticles, and they release continuous particles, so that's not great. And of course, it talks about the impact on aquatic systems. You may have seen these pictures, of course, and now we got mass.
Everywhere, they're all over roadways, shopping malls, but still.
Yeah. It is. And of course, right, the issue you have the low density, which floats, sorry, said that backward, and then high density polymers, so those gloves tend to sink. And obviously, right, talking about all the different sources of pollution, and you guys mentioned it, right, you see it, you literally see it in Bear Creek, so you.
Just imagine if people actually listen to it, you had to only wear it for 1 day.
I don't even want to get into that, because it's like, I've heard from medical professionals that really you're only supposed to wear a mask for like 20 minutes at a time, and then it's considered contaminated, so like.
Imagine like if everyone followed that.
Yeah.
Way worse.
Yeah, so anyways, more issues with that. And so I think we've talked about this before, how eventually all that plastic and all the trash can kind of accumulate and make a large garbage patch or trash island. And so notice the location of the garbage patch. And so they tend to be in the middle of the gyres. So of course, right, we mentioned our 5 gyres and the currents. And of course, this garbage patch then is kind of going to be in the middle of the gyre where there's less movement. And so,
Is it more likely to the right because it's slower waters on the right, on the western,
yeah,
eastern boundaries?
yeah, that would be my assumption why it's floating out there as well.
Because everything on the western boundary just gets pushed that way.
Yeah. And so again, high concentration of floating trash, but then this could also, again, make a home for different organisms. So, right, can be both bad, can be, have different maybe benefits. So obviously, like, it's bad to have all this toxic sludge there, especially accumulating any other toxins. And of course, right, if fish run into it or interact with it, that could be bad, larger animals. But then could be a home for bacteria or smaller fish to kind of hide in. So again, it mentioned like some fish was laying their eggs in the trash, and I think that was kind of helping their population increase. And so we mentioned some of the. One of them is pretty large, so you might be able to like walk on them. And I think there are also people like trying to clean up the oceans and different rivers, and then they make like barges kind of out of trash that float. So it's kind of interesting. So people kind of get creative with the trash too. And so of course, you know, trying to make some international treaties. So obviously this is difficult to regulate, right? Trying to get different countries to work together and not agree not to pollute. And I think it even says that the U.S. didn't sign the law of the sea. So of course the U.S. was really interested in controlling it, and then I don't know what happened. I don't know enough of the politics to know beyond the text. And so then the last little bit is just biological pollution with non-native species. So either introduced intentionally or accidentally. And so, of course, the problem is when they outcompete and dominate the native populations, and they can, of course, cause damage. I'm sure you guys can tell me.
Carp, chubs, bullfrogs, just in this area,
Yeah, dang.
tiger trout.
I'll write some down. Tiger trout.
Tiger muskie in the east part of Oregon.
Stuff to like make some nest in leafy trees.
No, so this is stuff that we had a problem with one species, and we said, oh, let's get a bigger, badder species to deal with that one. And now it's top of the food chain, we can't deal with them.
Yeah.
Especially like the carp. So carp are known to live in like sewers and 97-degree like puddles.
They're tough.
Like, no, for real, like, you'll see them in like drainage ditches in like California, like with trash all around them.
What? Oh my gosh.
Shallow water, so the water could be like 85, 90 degrees.
Yeah,
Like, it's nuts. Like, they thrive, they grow. I mean, they grow almost 6 pounds a year.
that's crazy.
Like, they're monsters. Like, they kill the environment. Like, they filter through so much that they take all the nutrients out of the
Wow.
water. And they just kill every other species then. And they get like this, they can be like this big.
Can you eat them, or are they like
They're
bad?
all bones.
Oh.
Like Korean restaurants and, I think some Japanese and Chinese restaurants, they boil it down into like broths for soups and stuff.
A lot of fishermen like them because they bite, like over in Europe, they'll do huge, like textured carp legs, just because people like.
Oh yeah,
them.
they're becoming a sport fish
No.
because they're strong. I mean, they're bulldogs, man. They just, it's like fighting
Like
a whale.
sturgeon or pike.
Damn.
Like, they're just, but they don't jump, they don't get weird, they just run.
Oh.
And they just, they're nuts.
That's pretty
Well,
funny.
they're pretty though. I mean, they're koi, essentially. Just big and wild.
That's pretty funny. So some other invasive species that your text mentions is tropical seaweed, Caulerpa taxifolia. And so a cold-tolerant clone was introduced to the Mediterranean and then took over. Apparently you can also find it in Southern California and Australia. And so apparently you're supposed to report it. And then obviously it says, you know, don't put your aquarium into the ocean. So that's often how these things start, is someone like dumps a goldfish or whatever innocently, and
Gets tired of their snake.
yeah, yeah.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Well,
And
those are a pain, the zebra mussels. They'll shut down a boat for like a month.
so we'll add that. So disrupt boats. So
Well, so, like, if you're, like, when I was competing in the bass fishing, I'd bring my, boat up, and if they found one zebra mussel anywhere on your boat, even if it was unintentional, which
Yeah.
it usually is, they'll mark your boat as you can't go into the water,
Jeez.
for like 30 days.
Wow.
And you have to have it recertified that it's clear of, the zebra mussels.
That's pretty crazy. So again, they're invasive, so that's a great story. So of how people try to control them, so boat inspections,
That's the one that was on our lab, right?
yeah. And of course, they, again, can drive out your local mussels, so obviously that's always the issue when they outcompete. And then obviously they can change the whole ecosystem and food web chain. There it mentions blocking the water pipes too of industrial facilities, so that can also be issues. And so then the last little bit is just the laws trying to govern the ocean. And so of course, right, we usually consider the ocean to be so large, it's just assumed to be free and inexhaustible fish supply. So of course, right, that's obviously not true. We've kind of mentioned how countries have tried to work to reduce, right, the harmful overfishing, but like we mentioned, underreporting is obviously an issue. And So now they came up with that every country has an ownership of 3 miles from the shore. And so that usually includes, right, the continental shelf. So that country would be hopefully encouraged to take care of course, the ecosystem there. And you can protect it with your cannons. And of course, mining and mining rights is also an issue. So they're trying to work with this law of the sea of who has mining rights. And I think it was that the United Nations had to allow you to dig, and you weren't supposed to mine in the deep sea without, again, approval. But you could mine, of course, on your continental shelf, so that's fine. And so some issues with, again, trying to lay stake to the floor bed. And
How
so,
crazy he wants to get into the laws of the sea.
oh, probably not crazy. Yeah. Again, just big picture. We should at least, although I don't know that I'll test on this, but at least like main concepts is, of course, right, coastal nations have jurisdiction. And then, so the idea of ship passage, so ships should be able to freely move around. So, of course, that's kind of the idea. And again, right, control of these deep ocean mineral resources. And so I think you needed US or UN approval was essentially the gist. So you can't just go mine.
So when you say, the ship passage, is that basically you can move anywhere outside of that 370-kilometer zone of each country, basically?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be so you can pass freely around to get your shipments moving around the world.
So that's why,
Until China takes Taiwan.
yeah, so pretty much what it was, so that's kind of why the Navy was invented, became a thing, was because pirates and other hostile, countries were preventing places like India and United States from trading with each other.
Mm.
And so the Navy became a thing to protect those waters so that there was a free and open path for these ships to get there. And back to that, I imagine that's kind of the same thing, like,
Yeah.
you can't just stop a ship in the middle of the ocean just because you don't want them to pass through.
Yeah, and
Or
your
you're gonna get blown up.
your book didn't mention like canals or anything, but I'm sure that's also part of it. Usually you have to pay though for like passage through a
It's just like
canal.
a toll
But
fee.
yeah. But so some sort of fee to go through the canals, but those canals are pretty popular and essential. Which canal?
The Panama.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. So especially like the
I
Panama.
imagine some of that goes to like maintaining it and making sure it is safe and able to be used as such.
They constantly dredge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Suez.
Except for the shut down.
They have a fire too.
And then this is just kind of showing who has jurisdiction, so showing like the waters that the US has jurisdiction over. So there's the Hawaiian Islands and the land that's under their control. So Guam, of course, is a US territory, American Samoa. So I think these are just all, again, the US lands shown here with the islands. All right, I think that pretty much concludes it.
What math is gonna be on the test?
I actually don't know if there's math on this exam 3.
I didn't see anything in the chapters.
Yeah,
I just wanna know if you're gonna surprise me with something.
And this test is chapters 11 through 16?
15.
Yeah, we had grade 16.
Yeah.
You know, the book really wants you.
Yeah, I haven't planned any math for this exam just because we didn't talk about anything. So I'm still finishing up writing your exam. So again, trying to get those big picture ideas. All right, make sure you turn stuff in, and then I have papers for people. But make sure you get any last minute things in.
The freshman planning on flag in 2007, one of the ocean rip it apart.
Probably. All right, other than that, we can end lecture, and then I'll try to hand out stuff as you run away. Here's one of your papers.
Even though I think India just landed on me.
Yeah, they just did.
Yeah.
Russia tried to beat them to it, and I think it exploded or something like that, or like it malfunctioned.
Okay, I think that's all of yours.
India just landed on me. That's pretty cool.
Well, no, I don't think they landed somewhere on it. I think they just landed in space.
Was it just a spacecraft? Okay. They landed on the South Pole.
I believe so.
I think that's what I heard, because they want to see if it has like water source or if it's like iced over, like ours is.
And then we still turn stuff in on Thursday, right? Yep. I have one more lab, I guess.
That was the only difference.
What's that?
I did the calculation, just 70% is crossing. I mean, 370 would have the exam.
I went up, like I said, psych. The funniest thing to me was blinkers were they indicate that I'm already there. You're on the freeway and they like.
All right, I think that's all the papers. So take anything. I'll post notes.
They really, you have to do that.
Hey, yeah, you can just turn it in.
Okay.
Here.
I wasn't sure if that was the file or not.
Have a good day.
You too. All right, thanks again. If you're still online, I'm gonna end the stream unless there are any other questions. So I'll just wait another minute or so. See ya.
Thanks, Professor. I'll email this for